Hello there, my name is Diana Kolesnik, and now we will unveil the top news of recent days. The Russians again shelled Ukrainian cities, and the number of missiles and drones launched on Ukraine is more and more similar to daily summaries about traffic jams in the city or the weather forecast. But today I would like to tell how the Kremlin distorts information about the shelling, which was written by the Deputy Executive Director of Vox Ukraine, Svetlana Slipchenko. If you have ever heard or seen Russian news, you know exactly the lies used by Russian propagandists. The most common practice is to call the place where the missile hit its target. For example, an avenue and a forest in Kiev became NATO military training bases in Russian news. A hotel in Kharkiv was a location for foreign mercenaries, according to the Russian Minister of Defense. And a restaurant in Kramatorsk was a place where military allegedly gathered, although it was an ordinary place in a frontline city. In general, the Russians can turn anything into a military facility, a hospital, school, hotel, residential building. They said that Ukrainian military personnel, equipment or ammunition were in these buildings. The military of the Russian Federation and officials boast of the results of their allegedly successful work, and people continue to believe in these so-called decision-making centers despite photo and video evidence to the contrary. If there is more evidence, then they start talking about the second version. Allegedly, it is the fault of the Ukrainian air defense forces. This version was voiced after the strike on the Dnipro in January 2023 and in Uman in April of the same year. In such cases, Russian missiles and drones also reached all targets, that is, only military objects. But the destruction of infrastructure and the death of civilians are bloody Ukrainian air defense. Only Russian missiles have repeatedly fallen in Belgorod and in other regions of Russia, because despite the lauded accuracy, the number of ammunition shortages and arbitrary assaults is very high. In general, this version does not withstand any criticism. After all, as the Air Forces Commander of Ukraine explains, as a result of the operation of air defense, there may be damage, but the fall of debris does not lead to such destruction as a missile hit. And the third version is generally pure cynicism, because Nazism is to blame for the death of Ukrainians. According to the Kremlin's logic, Ukrainians support the Nazis, so they deserve mass terrorist attacks and deaths. Actually, this version applies not only to shelling, it is used to justify Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This is how they try to prove that the Russian Federation is not attacking, but is protecting its borders from NATO, Nazism, and for other fictitious reasons. The Russians also justify the shelling as revenge for the fact that the Ukrainian army is defending itself. If they had surrendered to the Russians, there would have been no shelling. There would be torture, rape, murder and robbery, and there would be no shelling. You know, we will refuse such a prospect. Russia threatens the security of NATO member countries. And we are not talking about an attack that, according to intelligence, could happen in 3-8 years, but about the present. Let me remind you that on Sunday morning, during another missile attack on Ukraine, a Russian missile was in the airspace of Poland, as reported in Warsaw within 39 seconds. The head of the Polish Foreign Minister, Radosław Sikorski, informed NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg about the details of the incident with the Russian missile. The head of Polish diplomacy emphasized that this is another case where Russia's actions threaten the security of NATO member states.
The object was observed by Polish military radars throughout the whole flight. Earlier, as I said, all strategic actions were taken in order to ensure safety. Polish and Allied on-call teams operating F-16 planes were activated. Due to the fact that this is one of the biggest threats for Ukraine since the beginning of the war, this massive attack was one of the biggest. All of these actions were taken well in advance and in accordance with our strategy.
Due to the incident, Putin summoned the ambassador of the Russian Federation to hand him a note of protest. But as the spokesman of the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Paweł Wronski, reported, the Russian ambassador did not appear at the ministry. This was reported by the correspondent of Radio Svoboda. Well, this is the usual policy of Russia because they believe that it has not been proven that it was their missile. Although it is known that the missiles that hit Ukrainian cities and that fly into the space of NATO countries are launched by planes that are based at the Alenia airfield near. It is less than 200 kilometers from the border with Finland or Norway. Therefore, NATO certain countries can openly and clearly outline their position. The next time a Russian missile approaches the airspace of the alliance, not to mention violating the borders, there will be an attack on the Alenia airfield without warning, for defense purposes to destroy carriers of dangerous weapons. Experience showed that the Kremlin immediately stopped any provocations when it saw serious consequences. After all, this is not the first such case of a violation of the airspace of a NATO member state by a Russian missile. Although the Polish command explained that the military knew that the Russian missile would return to Ukraine, there they understand that Russia is deliberately maneuvering its missiles so that they make a circle and hit targets in Ukraine from the west. And if it is possible to provoke someone else, the Kremlin is always happy about it. Russia is trying to use the attack on Russia for propaganda about the war against Ukraine, as well as to justify the next mobilization. These are not my thoughts by Western politicians. British Finance Minister Jeremy Hunt said that the Kremlin is creating a propaganda smokescreen around the attack in order to protect the invasion of Ukraine. At the same time, according to him, the British government has very little confidence in any claims of Russia. Instead, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris rejected Putin's statements about any possible involvement of Ukraine in the events in Moscow that took place on March the 22nd. She also noted that the U.S. knows the Islamic State Khorasan appears to be responsible for what happened. Harris's statements came after Putin noted that the attackers, who are suspected of committing a terrorist attack, were detained when they were moving towards Ukraine. However, Putin recorded another video. Now he says that the attack logically fits into the actions of intimidation carried out by Kiev. That is, we are already scaring the Russians. Interesting. Putin was interested in why the attackers were going towards Ukraine, but he was not interested in how they drove almost 400 kilometers through the territory of Russia. And there is a simple explanation. If they were detained near Moscow, it would be difficult to blame the Ukrainians. It is hard to blame us even now, but who cares? By the way, it is a very effective practice to blame Ukraine nowadays. If in half a year or a decade there will be indisputable evidence of the Islamic State's guilt, the accusations of Ukrainians will still remain in the memory of the Russians. Well, it was not us who chose this path.
Путін знов розмовляв сам з собою.
Putin was talking to himself again, and it was again broadcast on television. Again, he accuses Ukraine, a sick and cynical creature. Everyone is a terrorist to him except for himself. Although he has been fooled by terror for 2 decades already, he is the biggest opening for terror, he and his special services. And when he is gone, the demand for terror and violence will disappear with him, because it is his demand, no one else's.
The Institute for the Study of War admits that the Kremlin is trying to use the terrorist attack to gain support for the war against Ukraine. Currently, Putin refrains from direct accusations, but he may officially accuse Ukraine if indirect accusations do not achieve the desired effect by the Kremlin. By the way, in order to achieve this, the Russian Central, I will emphasize once again that the Central TV channels showed videos with a deep fake, which seem to indicate the involvement of officials of the Ukrainian security forces. And all this was done in order to divert the attention of Russians from the incompetence of the Russian special services. That concludes today's video. Thank you for watching. Stay updated, comment, like and subscribe to our UATV English channel for more news from Ukraine. Your support really matters. Goodbye.